Hi guys, welcome back or welcome to Switch to Life, and today we're going to be reviewing the final installment of the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy, that of course being How to Train Your Dragon 3: The Hidden World. And I gotta say that I really love this movie. Granted, not as much as I love the first two, because in my eyes, the first two films were perfect at everything they did. With the third movie, it was good and possibly even great, but it definitely had its flaws. So without further ado, let's talk about it. First off, the animation. The animation for this film is stunning, and honestly, I kind of hate to say this, but I don't think it looks as good as the first two films. Granted, I grew up with that, so that just might be nostalgia, but honestly, the animation for this film is stunning, even though it's not as good as the first two. And the main reason for that is because Dreamworks used Pacific Data Imaging to take care of animating the first two movies, but then Pacific Data Imaging went bankrupt and closed down in 2015, which forced Dreamworks to create a brand new animation software called Moonray, and How to Train Your Dragon 3 is the first movie that Dreamworks made using this software. So it actually makes sense why they would have a bit of a problem with the animation. But honestly, I absolutely loved what they did. The animation is still stunning. Granted, not as stunning as the first two films, but only slightly. It's actually still really awesome what they managed to do here for the animation. And then there's also the voice acting. And I gotta say that out of the entire How to Train Your Dragon franchise, this film has the worst voice acting out of any of the projects. And I only really say this because they decided to replace Tough Nut's voice actor TJ Miller in the final film. And that's actually really disappointing because the fact of the matter is that TJ Miller was actually a really great voice of Tough Nut. He voiced him in the films and the TV shows, so you know that's actually really good. But just as How to Train Your Dragon 3 was finishing its production, TJ Miller ended up getting into some legal trouble, and I'm not going into details here, but unfortunately, this made it so that the head of Universal or Dreamworks or whoever told writer and director Dean DeBlois that he had to recast Tough Nut or the film could not be released. So unfortunately, Tough Nut was replaced by Justin Ripple, who I admit did a pretty good job dubbing Tough Nut's lines, because at that point, the animation for Tough Nut's voice acting was completely done. Yeah, TJ Miller had already recorded all of his lines and his character's lip sync was already animated. So dubbing over his lines, Justin Ripple did a good job. Unfortunately, he's no Tough Nut. So yeah. And then there's another issue. When it came to the characters of Snotlout and Rough Nut, I honestly hate to say this, but I hated their voice actors in this film as well. Granted, Jonah Hill and Kristen Wiig did an amazing job as their characters, but unfortunately, I don't know. After so many years of growing up with the How to Train Your Dragon TV series, I actually like the TV show versions of Snotlout and Rough Nut better than I do the actual movie versions, which is really sad. So I was kind of okay with it back when it was the first two films, but when it came to the third film, it was just unsettling to hear Jonah Hill coming out of Snotlout.
Who died and made you chief? What? Ow!
Also, can we all just admit that Snotlout is a bit creepy in this movie, especially with how he keeps going after Volka and how he's jealous of Eret, son of Eret? And then there's the music for this film, which is honestly really good. As always, John Powell does an amazing job. Unfortunately, not as good as the first two films, which is extremely upsetting. And then, of course, there's the world building, which I gotta say was done extremely well. Not only did we finally get the answer of what happened to all the other Night Furies, but we also got introduced to a bunch of new dragons, which brings me to a really good point for this movie, the CGI modeling, which was actually really good. I loved all of the dragons' designs and even the characters' designs. All of their wardrobes was done extremely well. And I'm not just talking about their flight suits, I'm also talking about their normal casual attire, Empire, which is really good. This film has the best character modeling out of any of the How to Train Your Dragon media, which is really awesome and an actual point in favor for this movie. But then we get to the actual story itself, and it is nowhere near as strong as the first two films. So, one thing that you have to know before going into the story, this film is the final movie out of the entire How to Train Your Dragon franchise, and it was supposed to be that way from the get-go. Essentially, this movie was supposed to answer the question, dragons are so cool and awesome, but where did they go? Did they go extinct? Why aren't dragons everywhere in our modern day world? And why do we treat them like they're nothing more than a fantasy? Well, this movie sets out to answer that question, and it does in a really stupid way. So, let's dive into the story. It's been an entire year since How to Train Your Dragon 2, which means that the dragon riders are still tackling Drago's dragon hunting empire, which is now leaderless thanks to the death of Drago Bloodfist. At least his supposed death. We don't actually know if he died. But now the Empire is being ruled by 3 warlords who I guess helped make up the clans that made up the Empire in the first place. And unfortunately, they're not doing a great job, and the Dragon Riders keep finding ways to steal all the dragons that they've managed to capture and bring them back to Berk. Unfortunately, this also creates a bit of an overpopulation problem. Sure, every dragon freed is a good thing, but by bringing all the dragons back to Berk, they keep making themselves a bigger and bigger target, and there's also the overpopulation issue. By having so many dragons involved, there's not really any room for new dragons or even humans to move in.
And where do you suppose we put these ones?
We'll make room.
The only thing that's keeping the dragons from completely tearing Berk apart is that Toothless is the alpha dragon, the king of all dragons, and the first king who's not a bewilderbeast. But he's doing a really amazing job if he's able to keep all of these dragons in line, which is really saying something because, well, dragons are destructive beasts, and yet they're still managing to live with all these other dragons and humans together in harmony. But let's talk about the other struggles that are going on. So, Hiccup and Astrid are obviously dating right now, but the thing is that Gobber, thanks to Hiccup's love of dragons, doesn't think that Hiccup can handle being chief of Berk if he keeps wanting to take down the dragon hunting empire and bringing in rescued dragons, thus creating the overpopulation issue. So he keeps hinting that Astrid and Hiccup should finally tie the knot and get married, which neither of them are actually ready for at this point. But speaking of love, Toothless actually goes off exploring, and he ends up meeting a cute dragon that he falls in love with.
Another Night Fury.
Oh, not quite. It's more like a bright...
A Light Fury.
Yeah, yours is better, probably.
And then Toothless ends up acting a little bit less like a king and more like an overeager puppy, but honestly, I'm happy for Toothless. He definitely deserves a chance at love, but at the same time, it does make it so that the friendship between Hiccup and Toothless is growing a bit apart.
Trust me, relationships are nothing but pain and misery. What did I just say?
And then there's also the fact that this Light Fury actually fears humans, which I don't really blame her because she's actually just a pawn in a big scheme made by the main antagonist of this movie, Grimmel the Grizzly. So it turns out that Grimmel the Grizzly is a retired dragon hunter who's responsible for the death of every single Night Fury. Yeah. Back in his prime, he ended up hunting down and killing every single Night Fury except for Toothless. When the Dragon Hunter Empire ends up calling him out of retirement, he's a little hesitant to join them until they say that he missed a Night Fury, at which point he decides to make sure that he actually kills this Night Fury, making sure that the Night Fury race goes extinct. And unfortunately, he actually did do that. By making it so Toothless is the only Night Fury Fury, Toothless actually can't repopulate, making it so that Night Furies will eventually die when Toothless does. Now, you might be thinking, he's gotta have a reason for only going after Night Furies, like maybe revenge for killing his family. But no, he's actually hunting Night Furies out of pride, because he ended up killing one when he was just a kid, and it made him a hero in his village. And that simple act made it so he wanted to kill every single Night Fury on Earth. Now, I don't know about you, but you have to be pretty powerful and even more evil to be able to make one of the most powerful dragon species go extinct just out of pride. And this guy is also really smart. In fact, he's the polar opposite of Hiccup. Both of them are pretty scrawny looking guys, but at the same time, they're also extremely smart. And while one of them is old and evil, the other is young and wants to only bring good into the world. And that's what causes Grimmel the Grizzly to be a great antagonist for this final movie. He might not be the best. I will actually give that right to Drago or maybe Vigo Grimborn from the TV show. But honestly, he's really up there and a massive threat, which is actually making it so that Hiccup decides to leave the island of Berk and makes it so that all the Berkians and dragons pack up and leave their only defensible home, which is actually kind of weird, except there's actually a lot going on in Hiccup's head. Due to the Dragon War against the Dragon Hunter Empire, Hiccup is taking a lot of losses in this fight, and there's always going to be evil in this world trying to use dragons for their own advantage. So Hiccup has been trying to rescue as many dragons as he could until eventually it got too much for the overpopulation of Berk, and he decides that the best course of action would be to take these dragons and bring them over to their ancestral home, the Hidden World. And since Berk is actually a major target of the Dragon Hunter Empire, the humans should go with them. Grimmel the Grizzly was just the final piece that made it so Hiccup actually went forward with this plan. And that made it so that Hiccup asked all the Berkians to pack up and fly as much as they could to the west so that they could find the Hidden World. On the way there, they have to make a bunch of stops, and eventually they stop at one particular island, which is actually really good. There's plenty of materials and foods to go around, not to mention water, and it's easily defensible. Nobody knows where they are, and so the Vikings say that they should set up a new village right there and begin building New Berk, which is actually not really what Hiccup wanted. He wanted to move into the Hidden World with the dragons, so he decides to appease the Vikings until they actually find the Hidden World and let them stay in this new Berk. That night, Toothless has a run-in with the Light Fury, who doesn't really have a name. For the sake of this video, I'm going to call her Luna for a lot of reasons. First off, she's as white as the moon, she's the opposite of night, and most importantly, Luna happens to be the name of a major dragon in the How to Train Your Dragon book series, so it honestly just makes sense. Anyway, Toothless and the Light Fury hit it off and actually fall in love, though it does take a very weird mating ritual that is actually extremely funny to watch. But when Hiccup shows up, the Light Fury is scared off and she ends up flying away, and without Hiccup there, Toothless can't fly. And I really love what Hiccup does, where he gives Toothless a brand new tail that allows him to fly on his own, which is actually something that they did previously in the How to Train Your Dragon Christmas special, Gift of the Night Fury.
You tried this once before. He didn't want it.
Well, until now, he didn't have a reason to. Well, he's my best bud. I want him to be happy. And besides, it's just until he brings her back.
So he accepts the tail and he goes off on his own, reunites with Luna, and they have their first date where they find the Hidden World itself. And then Hiccup and the Berkians run into a bit of trouble when Valka returns from a scouting mission, revealing that Grimmel the Grizzly and the Dragon Hunter Empire have followed them. They don't know where they are actually hidden, but the fact that the Dragon Hunter Empire is getting close to the Hidden World makes it so that Hiccup and the Dragon Riders launch an attack against him, only to end up falling into his trap, and then they end up escaping, except for Ruffnut, who was unfortunately left behind in all the chaos. Hiccup begins to think that the only reason the mission wasn't successful is because Toothless wasn't there. Hiccup and the Dragon Riders in general have been relying a bit too much on their dragons during these hunter missions.
He thinks he's nothing without Toothless.
Which is actually a problem because that means that the humans aren't really doing that well on their own, which actually causes Hiccup to end up regretting his decision to let Toothless go, but then Astrid and Stormfly decide to offer Hiccup a ride so that they can track down Toothless, and when they do, they discover the hidden world and all of its beauty, majesty, and glory, and they find Toothless and his new girlfriend Luna, and they see Toothless ruling over the hidden world in all of his majesty and glory, and he's ruling over the subjects that are already there, including Drago's Bewilderbeast. And then when Hiccup sees this, he realizes that Toothless actually has a really good life here, and he decides that the best thing to do would be for Toothless to actually be given a chance to live this life. And not just Toothless, the majesty of the hidden world is so big and grand that Hiccup realizes that this is one of those sacred places that humanity should never touch. And then they end up getting caught by the Dragon Sentry, which makes it so that Toothless literally has to rescue Hiccup and Astrid alongside Stormfly. And then they end up escaping the hidden world, and thus Hiccup is prepared to say his goodbye when they finally get back to New Berk. There's some good writing when it comes to Hiccup receiving advice via a flashback starring Stoic the Vast, which I'm really happy that they got Gerard Butler to come back to voice Stoic, despite the fact that his character is dead. But in the flashback, Hiccup and Stoic are talking about how Hiccup's mother Valka is supposedly dead and whether or not Stoic is gonna remarry.
There's no greater gift than love. But with love comes loss, son. Sometimes it hurts, but in the end, it's all worth it.
And so Hiccup is ready to accept that loss when he's about to say goodbye to Toothless so that Toothless can go on his own and live a good life in the hidden world, even if it means that he won't be there to live it with him. And then Luna shows up, so Hiccup realizes that maybe he doesn't actually have to say his goodbyes to Toothless. Maybe Toothless can just keep living with them in New Berk. And then Ruffnut shows up, and it turns out that she was actually let go by Grimmel the Grizzly.
I know what you're thinking. You've never had a prisoner this hot. Don't you hate when people never stop talking?
Yes, I
going,
do.
going, blah, blah, blah. That's all they have at that stupid new island.
Most annoying creature ever to cross my path.
Oops, you let the dragons out.
Take him and go! Please, I beg you!
Simply because she was able to lead them to the new island of Berk. Then Grimmel captures Toothless and Luna, and then threatens Luna's life, which forces Toothless to use his alpha ability to make it so all the dragons of New Berk will follow them to the Dragon Hunter Empire, where they will willingly go into cages simply because their king commands them to. And then when that happens, the Vikings are left stranded on the island on their own with absolutely no dragons, no way to fight back. And then Astrid gives some words of inspiration to Hiccup, which is actually a callback to how she inspired him in the first movie. And then Hiccup comes up with a plan to use all of the Dragon Riders' flight suits to get off the island and glide over the ocean. A feat that I don't really think is possible, but I guess it happens. And then they end up finding the Dragon Hunter Empire, and just in time, because Grimmel was about to kill Toothless, despite the fact that Toothless is the king of dragons, and if that happens, then the dragons will no longer obey the Dragon Hunter Empire. But still, Grimmel's about to go through with killing his last Night Fury, and then the Dragon Riders show up and fight back using their own human skills as well as weaponry to not only open the cages and free dragons, but also fight back against the dragon hunters, take down their ships, and eventually Hiccup and Grimmel have a final battle where Grimmel uses his Death Gripper venom to make it so that Luna will listen to his will, and then Hiccup and Toothless work together to take down Grimmel. But when that happens, Hiccup manages to get Grimmel off of Luna's back just as Grimmel shoots Toothless with a tranquilizer arrow, making it so that Toothless falls asleep and will fall to his death if something doesn't happen. So Hiccup frees Luna from the Death Gripper venom, and then he begs Luna to go rescue Toothless, at which point he falls to his death in a selfless sacrifice, not only killing himself, but also Grimmel the Grizzly. And then Luna, after rescuing Toothless, ends up going back for Hiccup, and then Hiccup is rescued by Luna, which is great because this is the first time that Luna actually interacts with a human that's not full of fear. This time, for the first time ever, Luna actually trusts humanity. But that's really bad because at this point, even though Grimmel the Grizzly is dead and the Dragon Hunter Empire has been destroyed, Hiccup realizes that there is still plenty of evil in this world, and they end up realizing that maybe the world just isn't ready for dragons.
I was so busy fighting for a world that I wanted. I didn't think about what you needed.
And so Hiccup makes the ultimate decision that Toothless should get to go to the hidden world and live the life that he deserves. And so Hiccup and Toothless say goodbye. But that's not all. When Toothless ends up going to the hidden world, all of the dragons from everywhere in the entire world are sentenced to return to the hidden world on a permanent basis. And I don't really understand the reason why that's happening. Sure, there are plenty of evil out there, but Hiccup and Toothless and the Dragon Riders literally just toppled the entire Dragon Hunter Empire, and they also killed Grimmel the Grizzly, so most of the threats are gone. At this point, they've proven that they can take on anything, but still, they decide that the best thing that they can do is to send every single dragon in the entire world down to the hidden world so that humanity forgets that dragons ever existed, which is something that I don't really understand. It was one thing when it was just Toothless, because that was the king of dragons, able to go to the hidden world where he could rule his subjects and at the same time not put himself in danger, as well as live his life with Luna, even if it would have been without his best friend Hiccup. But it's actually every single dragon in the entire world going, which I think makes sense if the dragon doesn't really have a human connection. But then there's the dragons that do have a human connection, which is really disappointing because they all say goodbye willingly. It's not like Toothless is ordering them to come to the hidden world. All of the humans on Berk are desaddling their dragons, and the dragons are saying goodbye of their own free will and choice, which I really do not understand. That alone makes it so that this is the final movie. But luckily, we do see a time skip in the future where we get to see Hiccup and Astrid actually get married, and then we fast forward 10 years later where Hiccup and Astrid have their own kids, and they're sailing to the hidden world so that they can get the chance to meet dragons. And I really love the way that their reunion was portrayed. Toothless was defending his territory and saying that these humans need to get out of here. But then once he recognizes that it's his old friend Hiccup, it turns playful, and they actually get a joyous flight where Hiccup and Toothless get the chance to fly around with their kids. Yeah, Hiccup and Astrid had kids, but so did Toothless and Luna. Leading up to this movie, I honestly thought that Night Furies were just the male part of the species, while Light Furies was the female part. But no, Night Furies and Light Furies are two completely separate species, and yet Toothless and Luna ended up coming together and creating a brand new hybrid species called Nightlights, which is really cute. And the fact that we actually know the names of these Nightlights is even better. Dart, Rough Runner, and Pouncer. but it's also weird because how is it that we know what the names of Toothless's kids are, but we don't actually know the name of the Light Fury? But anyway, that's how the movie ends. Hiccup and Toothless have one final flight alongside their children, and even Astrid gets the chance to reunite with Stormfly. So honestly, I thought that this was a great way to end the franchise, as well as a great film in general. But unfortunately, nowhere near as good as the first two films. It didn't have that kind of cinematography that the first film had, and it didn't have the dark story that the second film had. And while it did have the emotional tension that carried over from the first two films, it just wasn't as good as what happened in the second one. Honestly, the How to Train Your Dragon franchise is a tale of friendship, something that's supposed to last for all eternity, and yet Hiccup and Toothless by the third film have grown up, and now with the introduction of Luna, that friendship is growing apart, which I find to be extremely weird. Why is it that the single best friendship ever in the entire Dreamworks library is ending just because of a girl? I mean, whatever happened to pals before gals, right?
Am I not enough?
I think that's a no.
But anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on this movie. Overall, it was a really great movie, and I liked what it did and the way it ended the franchise, but I feel like the motivation for why Toothless left Hiccup is really stupid, and the motivation for why the dragons as a whole left humanity is also extremely stupid. But this movie is made up for it due to its humor, its story, and above all else, its emotional tension, as well as the beautiful animation that went into making it. And that's it for my review. You've heard my opinions, but what are some of yours? Make sure to leave your comment down below. And question of the day, if you had to name the Light Fury, what would you name her? And if you enjoyed today's video, make sure that you like and subscribe so that you can keep up to date on all things Dreamworks. But above all else, make sure that you're all staying safe out there, and I will see you in my next video. Bye-bye.
Bye.